Time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, we're going to talk about one of our favourite music genres today, and that is the rock subgenre called AOR, which sort of stands for album-orientated rock, arena-orientated rock. There's a sort of like subset of that, which is just melodic rock in general. And a lot of our favourite rock bands sort of come from that genre, both from like the classic rock bands in the 80s through to like modern rock bands, because there's a bit of a revival or resurgence of this kind of music, isn't there?
Yeah, and if you are unfamiliar with the term AOR, the giants of the genre that I'm sure everybody will know are bands like Journey and bands like Boston, and these sort of heavyweight classic rock, or best rock ever, or whatever it's normally called. They are often the heavyweights of the genre because they sort of invented it. The reason why they're so successful is because they merged this, the rock genre that was obviously coming up for quite some time since the 50s, and they sort of made it almost radio perfect, which is why it's the way it is. All the songs are often perfectly crafted.
Yeah. Catchy, good arrangements to keep your attention. They don't go on for too long. They don't do any individual thing for too long. Like, there's no jamming sections that could bore the listener. It's like a quick, concise riff or solo, isn't it?
Particularly when we're talking about singles. A lot of the bands come from different backgrounds. Say, for example, Journey comes from a jazz background, but you would have to really start listening into the deeper cuts, I think, for that to be obvious.
Yeah, I mean, like Journey were a little bit jazzy, wasn't they, in the first 3 albums? And then they sort of like slowly went more just rock without the jazz, and occasionally you'll hear a little bit of that, won't you? Like in some of the songs. It's
like, as you say, the singles and the songs that they're known for are super punchy, super radio friendly, and just they get it done, basically. But it's a really interesting genre because a lot of people have had issues with it, like critically in the past, like in interviews, saying that, what's really the point in making music that's so perfect, and then how do you chase that perfection? But as often these members of these bands like Toto and Journey say in interviews, now, because music has changed so much, by comparison, these albums are not perfect. These albums are almost like live albums because they didn't have the technology to do pitch correction and stuff for the most part. Obviously, there's some pitch shifting goes on and tape messing
there's
about.
A little bit of like cheeky tape manipulation to like speed up or slow down the pitch so that they can sing a little bit higher
on certain records. But for the most part, compared to what you can do on a computer today, these albums are mostly analog or mostly hardware orientated. And even when they started to get the digital technology, it's late 1980s digital technology. It's nothing like what you can do on Ableton today or in your DAW.
Yeah, it's weird to think that most laptops with GarageBand on probably have more functionality to record than some of those 80s studios. I mean, it's like is it Mike Olsen's Goodnight LA? Am I getting his name right? I feel like I'm getting his name right.
Keith Olsen.
I knew it was close. Thank you for that.
Mike Oldfield, I think.
Yes, I know.
Olsen.
But like I said, they say famously some of the bands went into his studio and he did it all with one fader, and that's all he had. He just had one fader, and he said that's all he needs.
Yeah,
and it's a bit like that with the modern sort of DAWs. For people who have laptops, it's like you don't even need faders. It's all in the computer.
Yeah.
And that's basically what he was alluding to in the 80s, is that he doesn't need the fancy studio because it's all going digital, it's all going in the box. And that's where like the interest comes in, because obviously these bands were taking production to its limit. They was using like 2 mixing desks like sandwiched together to get as many tracks as possible,
syncing tape machines together.
Yeah, just to give them multi-tracking options. And now you don't even have to think about that a lot of the time. The only thing you've got to think about is your CPU gonna take all the tracks and plugins that you've put on, really.
So the other thing with AOR is, for every band that is widely acclaimed and well known and that you'll hear on movies, TV and everything, there's these bands that are equally amazing and that have almost, like, for lack of a better term, been lost to time. One of these bands features a lot of members of Journey, and the band's called The Storm, and we listened through their first album, and we was absolutely blown away, because it was like discovering almost like a Journey album that hadn't ever been, or some sort of equivalent, and it's just a really fantastic listen.
You can only describe it as like crate digging in a vinyl shop, and then you stumble upon like something where you go, this is perfect, this is exactly what I'm looking for, and except it's on Spotify, so it's not as interesting. But basically, we stumbled upon The Storm, and the some of the singles on the first album just blew us away, because it's like that perfect sort of middle ground between what Jenny was doing sort of pre-Trial by Fire, even though this is after Trial by Fire for The Storm. The Storm are a 90s band, both albums come out in the 90s. But yeah, it's just sort of almost like a continuation of where there was going in that late 80s Journey sound. And that's what's so interesting about it. Even though like half the band's Journey, the other half of the band aren't Journey.
But also it features like Greg Rowley, who at that time hadn't been in Journey for quite a long time as well. So there's some weird like thoughts you have, like, well, if Greg Rowley can do this, why did he leave Journey in the first place? That's what you think when you listen to an album like both of the Storm's albums.
Yeah. And we've just got the second The Storm album called Eye of the Storm, which features such hits like Living It Up, which is a fantastic song, very comical, actually. Like, it's a feel-good rock track, that's the thing.
It is. Well, that's that, like you say, it's not a drama fest, it isn't ballad central, although there's ballads on there. There's some really, really good, fun rock, and I feel like in today's music, I think this is starting to come back, but obviously there's quite a mental health and sort of relatability in a lot of new rock music. Like when you think about bands like Shinedown, who have amazing albums, they always say that their focus is like men's mental health, because a lot of people don't talk about that music, and this is sort of throwing back to when that was less of a thought, because some of the songs on these are just like party songs in the best possible way.
I think the thing is a lot of the time, like a lot of the classic rock albums, really the message is, let's rock out and party, isn't it? That's the message. Like, if you was to get any of like the Motley Crue albums or Kiss albums or any of those classic rock bands, there wasn't really a message to most of them anyway.
And if there is a message, so like Crazy Crazy Nights, there's a duality to that message. The message is party with your people and all that, but there's also a countercurrent of them sort of being told that they need to change, or they've, they're a bit still, because I think the idea is that when they do Crazy Crazy Nights, like hip hop and rap and stuff is starting to come into the mainstream, and Kiss feel like they're being pushed out of the mainstream because, it's what's the line? That's the rap that they always say.
Okay.
And there's a counter message in that song.
Yeah.
But to anybody listening, you just think, oh, Crazy Crazy Nights, yeah, we're having a good time.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that these bands do so well, even if the lyrics are coming from a place where they are, about a personal experience or about a possible like cultural change or anything,
or a tragedy in their lives. They sort of disguise it, don't they?
They're disguised as fun songs, and unless you really, really start to sit there and pick apart the lyrics, you won't really latch on to that maybe negative undercurrent in some of the songs, which I think is very clever, because, like I say, Crazy Crazy Nights is a song where whenever I listen to it, I I always hear that counter message before I hear the party song, because it's one of those songs I've heard it so many times that that's what sticks out to me. But like you say, it's just a song about basically having crazy nights.
Yeah. Arena orientated rock, album orientated rock, melodic rock, they're all sort of the same. They're the same sort of thing. Really.
What I would say is album orientated rock came out of the 70s. So Boston definitely is in that era of AOR, as is the Doors and many other bands. But I think what happened is, because just the sound of music changed, that album orientated rock and the sort of blurted nature of where rock goes, it sort of becomes one in the same, that the rock albums by the big bands turn into stadium bands, and that all their albums are arena orientated rock. And I think it evolved from album to arena as the genre got bigger and bigger.
And I suppose in hindsight, you look at AOR and think of a certain few things. You think of like the stereotypical 80s keyboards, the blurted, drum sound with all the gated reverb. You think of the chuggy riffs and the key change halfway through the song. These are all the things that sort of people think of, which is why when people do modern rock in this style, you end up with like a hyper focused sort of set of rules, and not rules and regulations, but like things, tropes almost, that they can lean on and say, well, we know that the Final Countdown started like this, and we know that Separate Ways starts like that, and these are the things that you can do, these are the things that are within the realm of like the sound of the genre, basically.
Yeah, like I would say like Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi is a great example of like taking that to like a really far point with the key changes and the drama of it.
If you say listen to Living on a Prayer and then you listen to Party All Night by Steel Panther, it's like that kind of thing where you hear all the similarities, where they're not doing the same notes in the same song, but you can hear where they've took like the sound, the essence of the sound design, the essence of the pacing and the mood of Living on a Prayer, and they've gone, let's just like do that type of thing, which obviously puts everybody in like that party mood headspace.
And as you mentioned, Steel Panther, they are quite divisive because of the lyrical content, but you cannot deny, regardless to what you think of the comedy in the lyrics and the subject of their lyrics, they are absolute masters of the craft when it comes to pastiching these old songs. Like they do Van Halen, they do, like you say, Bon Jovi. They just sort of hit every corner, and the more songs you listen to, they're not necessarily doing copycat songs, but they just pick all the elements from these albums and make them into something new. And it's just, there's not many other bands that do it quite to the same level as Steel Panther.
And I definitely think like after their first album, Steel Panther sort of got a lot more creative and original with the music. Like each album's like, it's less like, oh, well, this song sounds like that and this song sounds like that, and more like, this song just has the vibe, but it doesn't. I can't really tie it to any individual song. But yeah, I suppose Steel Panther really, there wasn't first there on the 80s sort of revival with that 80s hair metal, but they definitely, I think the comedy helped popularise them
and made them stand out.
And it made them stand out. And then obviously they are like, one of the go-tos if you want that sort of like, particularly the Van Halen Motley Crue sort of side, like the sleaze rock and sleaze metal side.
Which is I know what you mean, it's a step removed, but it uses the same devices basically.
Yeah.
It's more of an attitude thing, I suppose. But the thing is with these songs, like when you think about Ario Speedwagon, Can't Fight This Feeling Anymore, they're basically perfectly crafted pop songs that are all done by rock bands. So you get the duality of having the attitude and the flair of the instrumentation with the, super catchy and sort of earworm vocal and melody lines.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so interesting, because I think, we all love to see somebody like shred on a guitar, like say on the Winery Dogs, but they're also great at adding context, because at the end of the day, if you don't have context to why you're shredding, it's hard to know where it's going.
Yeah, this is the full thing with virtuoso musicians, isn't it? In general, it's the balancing act between showing off how technically good you are and then keeping a general listener retained to get to that bit of the song. Because a lot of the time with virtuoso stuff, say take Yngwie Malmsteen.
I was just about to say Capriccio di Diablo.
Yeah. How many people are going to listen to the full song on Spotify without going, I think I've heard enough?
Yeah, because it's almost like drilling, isn't it? Because it's all the way through, and like you say, you can't deny it. But like, there needs to be some sort of hook that's rooted in like a song, even with something like Surfing with an Alien by Joe Satriani.
Yeah,
that at least has the chorus bit that isn't as insane, so you can be like, oh yeah, I can remember that melody, and I can enjoy that song. And then when he starts really ripping it, you can go, oh, I'll start listening.
Yeah, because it's all about, like, the thing that the AOR bands get so right is that it's about listener retention and making sure there's something for everybody. If you're looking forward to the guitar solo, there's one coming. If you want a sing-along chorus, there's one there, guaranteed.
And the big drum fill's normally there as well.
If you want, that air drum fill, like, in the middle of the song, that's there too. There's something for everybody. There's often, like, a very, friendly opening to a lot of the songs that instantly pull you in to a sort of story or a world, basically. They all start quickly.
Yeah.
They tend to grab you, particularly the radio singles, immediately, because that's what a radio song does. Is it captures your attention immediately.
Yeah, and are we sort of passing the point of a radio song? Like, I would argue that most songs on radio are dictated essentially by their streaming performance. So, and I know it isn't a one-for-one, but does it matter if your song isn't compatible for radio anymore? I mean, we know this regarding the language used and the censorship. Most songs on radio, particularly in the UK, are censored to hell anyway.
Yeah.
So that I would dictate that is not radio friendly. If you have to censor so much of a song, it's not designed for radio.
When you're censoring the hook of the chorus, it's one of those things where you go, this song wasn't made for radio, even if it's being played on radio.
Yeah.
They may have had to edit it to make it more radio friendly. Some people swap out lines. Sometimes you just don't hear the tag of the chorus. Sometimes it's just gone when you hear it on radio. And then if you don't know that song, you're listening to the song going, well, what are they saying? What am I missing?
And I would argue that in a lot of the sort of, in other decades, definitely pre-90s, that was not really a thing. Like, if you had to censor the main hook of the song, it would be pick a different song, because we can't, they couldn't do that, really.
That's the reason why so many of the bands, even the most outrageous bands, like say, I suppose Motley Crue come to mind, and Poison, and a lot of the sleazier hard rock bands that really push the envelope for what they could get away with. They're all clean songs.
Yeah, they are.
Because if they was gonna swear, they're gonna swear on a B-side or an album track or something that's not, like, say, Get in the Ring by Guns N' Roses. They're gonna swear when it doesn't matter as much. They're not gonna swear
in the middle of Sweet Child of Mine or something.
Yeah, or Knocking on Heaven's Door, or any of those songs, any of those singles on Use Your Illusion. They're reserving that for people who are listening to the album.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, I suppose. Whereas now I feel like Get in the Ring is your single.
Yeah, what, by comparison?
Yeah.
Well, because even, like, I don't know if we said on one of the other ones, but even like Taylor Swift's like radio hits are full of swearing and lines that have been swapped out and censored, and it makes you realise that, you know, these songs aren't written with that in mind, like, and that changes the entire sound, because if you don't have to cater for a medium, then you don't have to cater for the medium. It sounds so simple, but that's the full reason why AOR turned into what it did, is because they had to get on radio. They had to be perfect for radio. That's how they got their reach. But now you don't have to necessarily do that. You can blow up and have like a number one song. Radio might not have even heard of you at this point.
Yeah, and it's a bit like the Netflix or streaming shows not having to cater towards the 22-minute plus 7 minutes of advert sort of format. They can have an episode that's 40 minutes, an episode that's an hour, and then an episode that's 20 minutes. It doesn't matter. And that's basically where music is in the streaming age, is that you don't really need a format. Songs are going back to 1 minute 50, 2 minute 10. You know, you see that an awful lot. And a lot of these AOR tracks are quite the opposite.
Like
they
4 and 5 minutes.
4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6
Even the
minutes. Singles, they're all the same length, you know. Very rarely do you get a short song, because it's very hard to deliver a key change, 2 verses, 3 choruses, 2 guitar solos, a drum fill, an intro and an outro. It's very hard to squeeze all that into 1 minute 50 or 2 minutes 10. That's the other thing. Like,
I think one of the shortest songs that achieves that is I Believe in a Thing Called Love by the Darkness. That's the shortest song I can think of that
where they've got
to fit it all in.
All the story beats in like under 4 minutes.
It's definitely under 4 minutes. Don't know how long it is without looking. But the question is that freedom a detractor or a positive to music? Because music is it's an expression of yourself, and it's a free expression, but does having constraints improve the product? It's an interesting argument, I think, because obviously these songs by these AOR bands wouldn't have ever got that, you know, instantly recognisable, and there's a reason why people still love Journey. And why, if you walk into, like I was the other day, into like a B&Q or a store, you will hear More Than a Feeling on the loudspeakers, even though the song's like, how old now? 50, 60 years?
It's not quite 60, I don't think, but it's getting there.
Yeah.
I think that's because of the appeal, the widespread appeal. The other thing with a lot of these bands is that they're very inoffensive.
Yes.
You can walk in and like, everybody loves Toto's Africa, everybody loves More Than a Feeling, everybody loves Don't Stop Believing. You know, people old and young still like them, and that's what, you know. I mean, most of, in all fairness, like Africa and stuff have just turned into memes for a lot of young people, so they know them regardless, and that's the thing. You know, you can have them on and nobody's going to complain, you would hope.
I wouldn't have thought.
But you know, that's why they have that widespread appeal. They appeal to a lot of different people, and obviously they're classics, so they can put them on and they know they've stood the test of time. Generation after generation is like those songs, and that's why they're still played, and that's why they're fondly remembered. Obviously, there'll be bands that were more popular
that have been lost
to time, but these are the bands that people remember, because these are the bands that are culturally still relevant. Like, you will hear Journey on Stranger Things, you will hear Boston in movies, you know, all these songs are songs you will hear all over the place. You'll hear them
particularly in advertising.
Yeah, you'll hear them in advertising. You'll hear them on a night out in a club, because they're those sort of songs that people will play at the end of the night or in the cheese room or whatever. You will always hear these songs, and they've just sort of become like the standard for, right, everybody knows this song. It's a safe bet.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why they're so popular, but they wouldn't have that if there wasn't good songs.
So, onto the modern revival of this. I mean, there's some great bands that do a lot of stuff in the rock sphere. I mean, I would say there's new bands like the Struts that are occupying the Rolling Stonesy sort of area.
Yeah.
And there's other bands that do, obviously metal has always been its own thing, but these bands, these AOR bands, take a very, very specific band to sort of do it right.
Yeah.
And apparently there's something about the Swedish bands, but they get it.
Yeah, like the amount of times I'll go, now this is melodic rock, and you'll go on the band's bio and go Swedish, and you're like, they're all Swedish. It feels like, I mean, not all Swedish, but it feels like
A good chunk of the best and the ones where they really grab you, you look in the Swedish.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so bizarre about that, but it also shows you that culture has, embraced this style of music, definitely in the long run, a lot more than Western culture.
Yeah, bands like Work of Art, Eclipse, I mean, Palace is a really good one. I really like Palace, but there's so many. I'm naming a lot. Frontiers bands, which is an Italian label that specialises in this kind of thing. It's really hard to sort of think why there's such a scene in Sweden for it, because like a lot of the bands just have this sound, and it's like the go-to sound. I feel like it's the equivalent of playing punk music. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like they all just know how to play it. Do you know what I mean? Like, they just pick up the guitar and that's what you play. That's
the first thing. Is like they're just playing it's like songs like "Catch Me If I Fall" by Wet. They could almost be Journey if you just had Journey if you had Journey play it, even though it's written by Wet. They've just hit all of the beats that a Journey song would hit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like a specific Journey song. That's the thing that's what really blows me away. If you can listen to like a song that's like a pastiche of a band, but not a song by that band, just the band, that's where you're like, how have they done this? Because none of the specific songs come to mind. But this definitely sounds like the band.
Yeah, they've sort of like boiled down everything the band's known for and sort of like put it into one song that hits all those sort of story beats of what you would expect a band like Journey to do, and then they just give you it, and then it's only like when you're listening to the very end of the song that you're like, oh yeah, this sounds like a Journey song, because it's sort of slowly guides you there, and unless you're really thinking about it, you're just going to think that's a nice song, and then it's going to really hit you at the end when they do all the like Don't Stop Believing soloing, and then you're like, oh, this is like a Journey song almost. But
these bands also, they have a sound to themselves. They are distinctive. Like when we think some of our favourites are like Work of Art, Eclipse.
Cray is a very good newer band that's come out as well. They seem to be really good at adding like just a touch more modern production where it just hits slightly harder. There's just a really nice level of sound design as well to complement the band,
and they're trying to use the technology to make it more interesting as well.
Yeah, like Siberia by Cray is where this sort of genre would have gone if it was still like radio friendly all the way through up to like the 2000s. That's the sort of thing that I think of,
Or like Work of Art's, like, I mean, anything off In Progress. In Progress is one of those albums where I think it's one of the first melodic rock albums we heard from like a Swedish band or newer Swedish band. And it was just, you listen to it and it's just unbelievably well produced. And it's so interesting because all the guitars, drums, bass, all that's there, but there's this thick layer of keyboards, and the keyboards are just wild on there. It's not too dissimilar to what Toto would have done, really, if they would have kept going and said, I know that Toto didn't necessarily break up, but if they would have really pushed the keyboard sound design and the synth sound design like they did on classic songs like Rosanna, where they was like, we're going to make like an orchestral section out of Moogs. If they were still doing that today, I feel like Work of Art would be the natural conclusion of that.
Yeah, and like you say, the way they use the apps on In Progress and the way the keyboards just like hit you in the face, the full dynamics of the song and the way the songs come together, they're very punchy and they're just very well crafted. And that album is just like, I mean, I would put it in like my top 10 rock albums of all time.
It is like unbelievably good. And I don't know what it is about that album. It's absolutely cranked as well on a mastering front.
I think there's a fondness for me and Peter with it because it is one of the first albums we had that was like that, in that style. And then,
but what a first one of them to hear, though.
Yeah, well, I think
set the bar high.
In Progress has like, it is a slight, it's like, it's got all the melodic rock stuff in, but there's like a slight twist on it that makes it sound very, like it's coming from a very different place as well. And that's what's so cool about it. And I suppose the keyboard forward nature of it gives it a very unique sound design. If you used to mute the keyboards for a lot of these bands, they do kind of like stagnate a little bit for interest, because obviously there's only so much you can do with a guitar and a bass and a drum kit. Like you are limited. And the reason the keyboards and the production come in is to sort of lift that out of sounding like any other song. Yeah. It gives it like a uniqueness that, you know, like and a memorability to it that it doesn't just sound like another riff or another thing, because there's so much going on. A bit like why people really like the Final Countdown is that there's so much going on. There's so much to instantly break out of. If you've, say, listened to a load of rock bands where none of them have any keyboards, and then Europe comes on, it's like, oh, these sounds and the intro and everything.
When you've got a bed of keyboards, you can then start to play ostinatos and things that are less common on guitar, because you don't have to worry about providing the chords. You can just play lead elements or like I say, pedal tone elements over the top, and that's where you can get really interesting results.
Yeah, and I think it just opens them up to doing a lot more for songwriting.
So that's our takes on melodic rock, AOR, and all the sort of genres associated with that. And the question is like, for you to think about maybe in like the comments or whatever, is, does radio actually have a positive or negative impact on the music? That's the question.
Yeah, it is an interesting thought, and let us know what you think. So I've been Mark.
And I've been Peter.
And thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.